Last week we read a letter from Sahanadi's book about the one of the roles of the ashram, and how the atmosphere here is charged and suffused. As the mother puts it in one of her talks in 1958, how the atmosphere here is charged and suffused with the supramental light, which help us in the psychic efflorescence. How nothing here caters, even if we like, to a life of the ego. And perhaps the only way one can be happy is if one keeps progressing and allowing this psychic efflorescence. And the reverse is also true, that the degree of depression, if I may say, and the degree of complaining that we experience inside is a direct measure of how far we are moving away from the psychic touch, because its emergence casts out all depression, all revolt, all abhiman, despair, frustration from our being, because the psychic knows the divine. It does not need any mental analysis or proof. It knows the divine is there, and it is enough for it to be happy for the rest of its life, living with that sense of gratitude and joy. But more important are the inner conditions, the inner atmosphere. When the inner being is ready, a word, a phrase, as Sri Aurobindo puts in Savitri, a casual passing phrase can change our life. There are some very illustrating examples in the spiritual history of this world. Two examples that come to mind. One of them is the story of King Janak. King Janak is so ready. He is looking for a master who can show him the light of Brahman, give him Brahman realization. And he asks, is there a master who can give me the light of Brahman realization like this? Within that much time, he specifies, as you need to put a saddle across a horse and ride over it. Astavakra, who in physically is bent at 8 places, deformed, if one may say, is inwardly so beautifully formed, so perfect, that he says, I can give you that realization in that much time. And lo and behold, by the time Astavakra rides over the horse, a few words from him are enough to rend the veil, and Janak is no more just King Janak, but a rishi. There is another story. This, of course, is initiation by a guru, a master, an adept. But when the being is ready through another process of worldly life, again, sometimes God can speak through anybody's tongue, and it is enough to open the psychic door, even if for a moment, and the soul is marked for the higher life. This other story is from the story of the great saint Tulsidas, who wrote who changed Valmiki Ramayana into Ramcharitmanas, which made it so accessible to many, many persons. Valmiki Ramayana is so much more difficult. It's in Sanskrit to begin with, and Ramcharitmanas is so much more easy. The popular version of Ramayana, as we understand, is Ramcharitmanas, and it's so beautifully laced with a psychic consciousness that as one reads through it, one feels really it touching so deep in the heart. And the story goes about his life, that he was like any of us, a normal human being, involved with life, attached to all the things. And of all the things, he was most terribly attached to his wife. And it so happened that his wife had once gone away to her parents' place, which was across the Ganges. Unlike many of today's husbands, he felt that he must go and meet her. He was not happy about the situation. And one day he felt a deep, passionate urge to go and see her, longing. And the river was full. So somehow he crossed drenching with water. It was raining. And as the legend goes, minus the little bit exaggeration here and there with each legend, but the point is important, that he mistook a serpent who was hanging by the window to be a rope. He was so much overpowered by love, passion of a humankind mixed together, that he holds it and jumps through the window into her home, because it's late night and it's not improper to knock the door and the in-laws would open and say, what is it? This is no time for you to come, or whatever else, maybe some shame. He just jumped in. When his wife saw him, she was dumbstruck. And the only thing she said was, "You're so crazy. Are you crazy?" To put it in modern language. Are you crazy? If only you could put all this passion in search of the divine, you would be a changed person altogether. You would realize the divine. In fact, he says, if you loved God with the kind of attachment with which you love me, you would realize the divine. What a madman are you? Maybe she said other things we don't know, but it was enough for Tulsidas for his life to change. His life changed. It's so strange in this world that his life changed, he heard it, and her life remained the same, except that her love for the husband, it said that when she died with the lips of her husband on her name, waiting to see him, but she was so absorbed in bhakti for Lord Rama, and he realized he had many interesting, great experiences. So when the soul is ready, we don't know at what point of time one word from whom will rend the veil, and the moment may come for the apocalypse, for the epiphany. Sri Ramakrishna has recounted another story, how one takes sannyas. Of course, ours is not a yoga of sannyas, but it's about that point of departure. So, there was a person who used to keep threatening his wife that, if you do this, I will take sannyas. If you do that, I will take sannyas. If you do this, I will take sannyas. If you trouble me like this, I will take sannyas. One day his wife just came out and told him, this is not the way to take sannyas. So he says, what is the way? She just picked up a towel and said, here is the way, and walked out of the house. So, this readiness is what is important. It takes a long time for this readiness. Many experiences of life prepare us ultimately. The psychic, it is said, drinks all experience like a strengthening wine. It gets ready not only through things which are happy and pleasant, but also, perhaps much more, and I am reminded to keep the handkerchief below it, yes. Perhaps much more through things which are unpleasant and unhappy in life. In one of her talks, when somebody asked Mother, what should we do when human love comes across us? Mother said, laughs and says, perhaps you should just go through it, because at the end of it you will realize that it cannot give you what you are seeking. Something to this effect. It's not exactly the same words, but she says something to this effect. And we read last time that how in the beginning the psychic leans upon earth. This is not always the case. It can be other ways, but she speaks of how the psychic leans upon the human for its experiences. But a time comes when it turns from the apparent to the real, from the human to the divine. This is the more common, a long period of preparation. As we see in Savitri, a long, dim preparation is man's life. A circle of toil and hope, of war and peace, dragged by life on matters obscure ground. Through all this, there is a preparation going on. A long, dim preparation is man's life. And this long preparation is until a giant point is reached. Sri Aurobindo uses the word giant point. When His glory shines through us for whom we are made. This is the giant point for which all is a preparation. In another poem, Krishna, he says something very beautifully. At last I know the meaning of soul's birth into this universe, terrible and sweet. This universe has both sides, terrible and sweet. What is the meaning of all this terror and sweetness? He says, I who have felt the hungry heart of earth aspiring beyond heaven to Krishna's feet. For this one moment lived the ages past. The world now throbs, fulfilled in me at last. This fulfillment that we see cannot come but through the vision of the Supreme. But this cannot be through an intellectual understanding. The whole being must be ready. And all experiences are a readiness of the being. Even when it is ready, it takes time. And here, the whole complex process of evolution comes into play. Even with those who are developed, Mother says the psychic consciousness may be so developed that sometimes at the first cry of the child, the psychic being comes in contact. But this is exceptional, she says. In still rare and exceptional cases, it can preside over the formation of the womb. Right from the moment of the womb, there are parents who feel that their destiny changed. Everything changed in their life. Why? Because this being who was presiding was so much more powerful that it started changing everything because it wanted a particular experience and a particular destiny. Again, she says this is rare. Usually it takes time, few years, 7 years, 14 years, before some contact takes place, and then she says, some people, the active contact never takes place. It always remains behind, just getting some experience, little bit, and growing slowly through so much pain and horror and pleasure and sadness and all the things of life that we relish and cherish and abhor and become sick of. The other problem of this emergence is that every new principle that emerges, Sri Aurobindo explains, is dependent on the past, because the whole journey is on this, iheva. If that was not the case, it would have been so easy. We know that there is a soul inside. We know by concentration in the heart we can find it. And we would have all sat and turned yogis overnight. But it doesn't happen, because on earth, any new principle is not only first dependent, is first imprisoned by the past. We spoke last time of how life, when it emerges, is so dependent on matter that if the body is hurt and injured, the life is not dependent on material processes. There is an independent life, but it cannot stay on in the body. Sometimes the being has to decide to leave the body simply because the body is no more in a fit condition to hold the life force. There are strange instances. I know of an instance of a police inspector who died suddenly he was inspecting a truck, he was young and he was overrun and he died. And his wife naturally went through depression, and I was asking her, did she have any contact with him in the dream? One of the contact was so vivid. She says, he came to me and told me that, I was standing, I don't know what happened. Suddenly I saw that they are taking my body. He came to her in contact and is telling that I saw that they were taking my body into the hospital. I tried to enter but I could not. Now, the being is there intact, the life force is there, it is living, he is existing. But because the body is not ready, it is so dependent on the body that it cannot enter the same body. Same thing when the mind develops, it becomes imprisoned by the life force. That is why when the mind is in early stages of development, especially we see it in little children, because the mind principle has come up but is not yet developed. And some of us always remain a little child, that every rational process is subservient to the life impulse. So whatever the vital does and wants, reason justifies it. It's simply because this reason which is developing must pay tax. It's like a tax. Life force will refuse. The moment you try to tell the life force that no, this is not the right way, you must understand, immediately life force will sink and say, okay, you want to be independent of me? Fine, I just don't cooperate. And there are people who go into depression simply because of this conflict. The mind does not want to sanction life force, the old ways, and therefore the life force goes into a strike. It says, I am not cooperating with you. So in the early stages, even the mind, even a person with a brilliant mind, rational mind, thinking mind, who is very good in field of mathematics. In the field of mathematics, life force is okay, fine. But the moment he comes to the life situations, he becomes miserable slave to all the impulses. Simply because that is the prize. It is emerging with life and matter as basis. Even so much that even matter, it becomes hopelessly dependent on matter, even for the mind to emerge. Ask somebody having a high fever to sit and meditate. See how difficult it is. One has to have truly a mind which is completely free of the physical sense. I think in one of the very first sharing session we had read how Aurobindo says one of the necessities is to make the mind completely free of subjection to the body. It should be so detached from the physical state that even if the body is going through pleasure or pain, it should be able to stand back, separate, and look upon it and have an independent life. All mentally creative people are able to do it. They are able to detach themselves from the physical condition and have an independent existence. But that comes much later. In the beginning, it is totally dependent on life and material condition. The same principle applies when the psychic emerges. In the beginning, the psychic is completely dependent. Even when it is emerging, even when the first touch has been given, it is struggling with mind and life to emerge, even with matter. So when it begins to emerge, the mind says, is it a true experience? Is it really true? When you went inside the ashram, you felt very nice. Could it be that it was a hallucination? Is it that you are being carried away by people? All kinds of questions will come, doubts and questioning. People have asked Aurobindo, I felt like this, is it true? And Aurobindo would say, yes, even feeling can be an experience, spiritual feeling. But in the beginning, the mind doubts. It wants all kinds of proof. Similarly, the vital says, oh, very nice, this is very good, now I have another power at my disposal, the spiritual. But what can you do for me? So, the life force wants the psychic to be subservient to itself. It says, divine is very nice, but can the divine do this for me? Can he give me what I need, what I want? And if it is given, life says, yes, I can believe there is the divine. The day there is a refusal, it denies the divine. Because the psychic emergence is in the beginning so much at the mercy of the mind, at the mercy of life. And this is something very beautiful that Aurobindo reminds us even of body. So, in ancient yoga, even in traditional yoga, where we speak of the spiritual emergence, for instance, Patanjali, who codified a number of yogas and saw, he emphasizes on working upon the mind and the vital through yama, niyama, pratyahara, working upon the physical through asanas, upon the pranic sheath through pranayama. And unless there is a preliminary working on these parts, they don't allow the psychic emergence. Again, when we know what happens when we meditate on a heavy belly, and what happens when we meditate after a good jog. And after, of course, all the beautiful physical education classes. So they are not just because, of course, later on it's about physical transformation and things like that, but that is a much later thing. Even just for the emergence of the psychic principle, if matter is dense and heavy, it just won't allow. When we read in Savitri, when Savitri tries to enter into the inner countries, the first level of difficulty she meets is with the material form. And it's described very beautifully. She tries to push inside and the gate is very, very hard, rigid, locked. She tries to push a little and it closes back and says, out, out, you creature of the mud, stay out, don't get inside. This is what matter tells us. What is all this trying to concentrate inside? Not allowed. You are a creature of the mud, stay there. Because it keeps the soul completely a prisoner. One wants to go inside, but one cannot, because the wall of matter is so dense and obscure. Every physical effort is actually an effort even towards a spiritual and psychic emergence. This is the beauty which Aurobindo reminds us. Otherwise, we all were becoming like, old-time sannyasis who would eat good food and like to meditate, and that's what their life is. Well, maybe an odd person can do like that. A soul which is ready can, in a moment's flash, with no preparation in this life, can suddenly get a revelation. But for most of us, a working is required on matter. Even after a working is done on the matter, the life impulse will not allow the psychic to emerge. So in Savitri, we see the second level of difficulty is from the life force. Aurobindo speaks of a false soul of desire, which is the troubled passion, anguish, the troubled emotion, which is all the time disturbing us. And it catches the soul and says, this is it, don't go further. So many of the vital forms of bhakti, as opposed to the true bhakti, which is a psychic thing, we don't find those forms here in the ashram. Like we have vital forms of bhakti like Rath Jaga in northern India, where people whole night are sitting with all kinds of symbols and the beating of the drums, and they are shouting, crying, dancing, jumping, and thinking it is worship of the divine. But it is simply the vital getting into a state of excitement, because that's what it understands, and for it that's what is bhakti and that's what is psychic. And it does attract some vital entities, and it's very happy about it. But a time comes when one has to free itself even of that. That's why all effort at regulating one's desire, all effort at quietening the vital, all effort at conquering the emotions and feelings which arise from time to time, all effort at turning, Aurobindo uses the word, every fiber that is turned from its allegiance to the ego towards the divine is so much of a travel on the path. Because if we look at life, everything that we turn away from the ego, deny its impulse of the ego to find its own satisfaction for its own sake, is that much of a ground gained. It's a slow and long process. And even when one has done that, then the mind stands a sentinel. It will not allow the soul to pass 100 questions, 100 difficulties. And therefore, again, the mother says, one of the first things, if we want to discover the soul, she speaks of in the volume on education, volume 12, psychic education. She says, the first thing is that the mind must know it is incapable of judging spiritual things. As long as the mind is constantly interfering, constantly trying to judge every experience, constantly trying to even observe sometimes what is going to happen. I am sitting for meditation, will this happen or will that happen? And even when that is quietened, Aurobindo speaks of it, and of course the mother has described in prayers and meditation. It's a real experience for everybody. I'm sure all of us have experienced it. How just the mechanical activity of the mind keeps on going, running. Even when the other layers have become quiet, this mechanical mind will just not leave. So one has to ignore it and bypass. If one tries to force it into silence, it doesn't. It will continue because that's its nature. It's much later that it falls silent. But it just would not allow the deeper soul to pass. And it can give all kinds of things, false attitudes, false conviction, to rest at this point, that point, at an intellectual exposition of the truth. Therefore, even just for the emergence of the soul, it has to tackle these three ministers. If the ministers are good, then it's very nice. Usually they are bad. They don't allow easily. And therefore, one of the best ways to prepare them, as Aurobindo and the mother would tell us, when we are leading a human life, is to develop a taste for the true, the noble, the beautiful. These are the three things which, before the psychic has actually turned toward the divine, these are the three things towards which is naturally attracted. So if there is a sense of beauty, true beauty, not just a beauty of course, surroundings, that is perhaps the easiest. But whenever there is a beautiful thought, the psychic loves and it steps forward. Whenever there is a beautiful feeling, a noble feeling, a generous feeling, a feeling which is full of goodwill. So in mother's symbol we see the outer 12 petals which are necessary for the new manifestation. And if we really look closely at these 12 petals, which she has said they change with time. Of course, she has given certain names and colors, but she has also said they change when much later a disciple asked her. They are actually psychic qualities. Many of them, goodness, courage, love, gratitude, all these, equality, peace, they are by their nature psychic quality, joy, harmony. When the psychic emerges, these things develop. And if we create these things, even through the mind effort, the psychic emerges. So Mother says there is a reciprocal dependence of both these. The more we work upon the mind, vital and the mental sheaths, the more the psychic emerges. And the more we allow the psychic to emerge, the more the mind, vital and physical are worked upon. So much so that even physical consciousness irradiated by the psychic can become so receptive to grace that big diseases can really get healed in a short time, simply because the physical has been made ready by the psychic touch. But when it is not ready, and it is possible, all possibilities are there in this universe. That's what makes this life so very charming and unpredictable. Mother says one can have a very developed psychic consciousness and a very idiotic outer consciousness. She says it's very unfortunate, but it is possible, it happens. So all possibilities are there. Only in that case, one has to struggle so much. And there are many reasons for it. Some people take upon themselves a very difficult consciousness to work upon it. A developed psychic consciousness may sometimes take a very nutty mind or a very difficult vital, just because he has decided to participate in the work and to work upon that layer. So there are so many possibilities and so many combinations. And in addition to these general things, each one of us has our own unique past. And that is why it's so difficult to form any general rule about spiritual life, at least this spiritual life. Unlike in traditional yogas, where it is enough. In traditional yoga, what is done is, as we are speaking of Patanjali Yoga, the mind, vital and physical must be that much prepared to allow the psychic to come out. If that is done, the rest is taken care of. Beyond that, one leads a double life. There is a psychic life within and a good life, a good human life, usually a sattvic life outside. So the rule is, the mind should, one should not be crude, one should not be vulgar, one should not be dishonest. But otherwise, one can lead an ordinary human life, and there are special moments dedicated to the psychic life. So in traditional yoga, we have generally a time given, a method given, usually a mantra or a technique, and one spends some time for the psychic emergence. The rest of the time, one leads a normal life. The rest of the life is not under the psychic, but under a mind which is more or less sattvic. So one should be generous, one should do good, one should be charitable, etc., etc. But here, because the whole stress is for a change of life, it is not enough to lead a divided life where there is an outer life which is governed by the mind and reason, and an inner psychic life which is independent of it. To put it in a different way, the divine, it's not enough that we have a split where God is locked inside a little cupboard and sometimes in a room, and every day morning 5 minutes we owe allegiance to Him. And when we step out, the living room is my property, the workplace, office is my fiefdom, and the bedroom is my ego and desires place. It doesn't help. It creates, at least in this yoga, it doesn't help. In others yoga, if one can do it, the rest of the life can be egoistic but sattvic ego. But in this yoga, it doesn't work out at all. This psychic must step outside. In fact, in Savitri, before Savitri starts the journey, she is contemplating that this change where conquest of death is required should take place. And then Sri Aurobindo describes, but for this high spiritual change to be, earth must transform itself and equal heaven, or heaven descend into earth's native right. And then what is the way? He says, out of the mystic cavern in man's heart, the heavenly psyche must put off her veil and step into common nature's crowded rooms and take the charge of breath and life and speech and act. In fact, Aurobindo says even how speech can be under a psychic control. Speech is the most difficult part, one of the most difficult, because this tongue is given to all kinds of things. By nature, it is in us human beings, unfortunately, under the governance of the animals. So we have shed our claws, we have shed our horns, we have shed our tail, but a new weapon is with us, tongue. It can hurt and harm like anything. It can be so dangerous that Mother says in one of her writings that if one uses this to project vibrations of ill will in a vulgar language, says especially in a vulgar language, then it is like spiritual suicide. It's, I think, one of the most powerful and short passages. And she says, let us meditate on this subject. So this tongue, even that Sri Aurobindo speaks of how to put it under the control of the psychic. It is there in Letters on Yoga, maybe we'll read it sometimes. Even Sahanadis, it's there in Sahanadis correspondence, where she says, I feel so beautiful inside and everything, but when I speak, I let myself flow through the emotions and the vital. And then Sri Aurobindo says, the psychic self-control desired in these circumstances when you speak are the following. He gives 6 points. How to speak under the influence of the psychic. How to walk with the psychic. How to deal with human beings with the psychic. How to do business with the psychic. It's amazing. It's a very detailed. But the first thing is the emergence of the psychic. That comes, of course, later. So we'll maybe read a passage. It's something she says about the psychic emergence. A certain sensitive feeling for all that is true and good and beautiful, fine and pure and noble, a response to it, a demand for it, a pressure on mind and life to accept and formulate it in our thought, feelings, conduct, character, is the most usually recognized, the most general and characteristic, though not the sole sign of this influence of the psyche. As a corollary, Sri Aurobindo also says there is something called as a psychic sadness. He says this psychic sadness is not like the vital sadness which is full of demand, desire, depression, frustration. But psychic sadness, the psychic feels sad when it comes out and sees how the mind and vital are making a fool of itself. And then he uses a very beautiful term. This sadness is purity offended. When it steps out and sees, oh, my mind, it is doing such foolish things. That's why, so long as the psychic is not emerged, one is happy doing all the things. But the moment it emerges, it puts a pressure. And this pressure is not well received unless the vital and mind are ready. They don't like it. So, when psychic emerges, sees they are not able to bear the pressure, it feels sad. There is a touch of sweetness in that sadness. And it withdraws till they are ready. So there is a double work, the preparation of nature and a focus on the emergence, and the two go hand in hand. There is no way that the psychic can emerge without working on human nature. This just almost an impossibility that any technique will just lead to psychic emergence without working on human nature simultaneously. Wherever there is a spontaneous admiration for the true, the beautiful, the noble, there is something divine expressed. When someone asked the mother, Who is the divine, or what is the divine? What is the divine, I think? So there are a number of answers Mother has given to the same question. But in one context, she says, the divine is what you adore in Aurobindo. Really, if we look closely, what is it that we adore and admire and love? That is the divine. Sometimes it may be describable, sometimes not describable. And in fact, that is the purpose of the embodiment. Aurobindo says, the psychic, all this is a training, but for its emergence, it needs contact with the outer. Something must manifest as the divine in the very outer, otherwise it doesn't fully open. And that is the task of the embodied divine, or at a lesser level of the guru or the master. So here she says, wherever there is a spontaneous admiration for the true, it may be irrespective of anything or anyone, the beautiful, the noble, there is something divine expressed. Again, as a corollary, that's why jealousy is the most vicious poison that eats the soul. Because it's just the reverse. Jealousy would never appreciate anything which is true, beautiful and noble in another person. And in oneself, one always exaggerates that I am the only true person and the only beautiful person and the only noble person. Jealousy just would not allow the soul to emerge, because it will never allow this appreciation. But irrespective of the person, even in one's enemy, so-called enemy, there is something very interesting in Mahabharata, that when Karna and Arjuna are fighting, so suddenly Krishna appreciates Karna when he pushes Arjuna's rath a few yards behind. So after a while, Arjuna says, what is all this? Tell me. I am with my arrows pushing it 300 yards behind, and his arrow pushes just a few yards behind, and you start appreciating. So Krishna says, no, you won't understand. You know, on your chariot I am sitting with the burden of 3 lokas, and yet he is able to push few steps behind. I know you must kill Karna. That is the task you are appointed for. Yet, no harm in appreciating where there is something really beautiful and courageous. So here is, in fact, there is the divine element even in one of the very occult treatises of ancient India, Yog Vasisht. There is a description of how when one travels into the occult world, one finds even Duryodhana is sitting in the heaven. So the question is, why this man is sitting in heaven? He says there was a part of him which was at least bold and courageous. That part refused to bow to, all said and done. He did cheat and all that under the influence of Shakni, but there was a part in him which wanted to stand in the battle and fight courageously. He would not just surrender, because that there is a courage and heroism when you stand face to face with an enemy and don't just run away from a battle or shrink it. So that part is under the radiation of the psychic influence. So whatever is true, noble, there is a nobility in it. There is a nobility in chivalry of this kind. Whatever is beautiful, you should know for certain that it is the psychic being, this soul in you, with which your physical consciousness comes in contact when your heart leaps out at worship and admire what you feel to be of a divine origin. So when suddenly we are face to face with the picture of the mother, to give an example in our context, but any context it would apply, and suddenly our heart leaps out at gladness. There are tears of joy which stream down the cheeks, and we fold our hands and quietly offer a prayer to her. It is not vital emotion. It is the psychic, and she says one more word. It is the psychic coming in contact with matter. Every time this happens, of course, it's a spontaneous feeling she is speaking of. She is not speaking of a mechanical and done thing, but something which happens spontaneously. You should know for certain that it is the psychic being, the soul in you, with which your physical consciousness comes in contact when your heart leaps out to worship and admire what you feel to be of a divine origin. Even sometimes looking at the universe at night, All the stars arrayed, Sri Aurobindo speaks of the immense array of stars, are divine moments. One stands and suddenly one is filled with a deep admiration. Whose is the hand behind this beautiful painting on the canvas of the universe? And the mother says, be sure, it is the psychic which has leaped out and come in contact with the physical. To different situations. And there comes a time when a least grain of sand, as the mother puts it, can be an occasion for thy worship. And lastly, fundamentally, without this kind of inner will of the psychic being, I believe human beings would be quite dismal, dull. They would have an altogether animal life. And she says, this is the hope. In one of her prayers, she says, it's because you are there so much at the center of everything that even in the most cruel person, cruelty is farthest from the divine, Sri Aurobindo says, you are there, and therefore there is hope. They would have an altogether animal life. Every gleam of aspiration is always the expression of a psychic influence. Without the presence of the psychic, without the psychic influence, there would never be any sense of progress or any will for progress.